piece in the New York Post didn't get enough attention, in my opinion. It should get a lot more because it tells you what's coming. And it really points out one of the major progressive advances that they have made. One of the big progressive, it's really a progressive coup. And it has been a silent coup, largely, because people don't understand. Most people don't understand what this really means because the government's hiding its hand on all of it. But this piece in the Post, I want to point out to you, it's by Paul Sperry, who's a Hoover Institution fellow. And he's the author of Great American Bank Robbery, which talks about the racial politics behind the mortgage bust, something I've discussed with you before. How did we get to toxic mortgage packages where they're doing all of these, they're doing all this Wall Street sort of sending this slop around? How do we get to that point where banks no longer were giving mortgages real ratings? Well, because they removed the criteria. They removed the benchmarks. All of a sudden, you couldn't just base it on whether somebody was creditworthy because of racial politics. And it goes back to the Community Reinvestment Act. This took decades, and it was a meltdown that almost destroyed our economy, and with it perhaps would have taken down the global economy into a worldwide depression. Everyone says that, by the way. This is not crazy talk, right? If there's such a thing as a bipartisan consensus, and I know some of you disagree with this and say that this was used merely to get a bailout for the banks, but there's a widespread consensus on how close we were to financial Armageddon, and it was all put into motion because the decision was made that you can't base mortgages on each individual if in the aggregate there's a disparate impact. Very important, disparate impact. If minorities aren't getting enough mortgages, it doesn't matter if you're using objective criteria. That's not fair because of disparate impact. That's what they say. And so they got rid of that. And all of a sudden, you had all these complicated financial instruments, and Wall Street saw an opportunity to capitalize on the government's stupidity, knowing that the government would eventually bail Wall Street out because of its stupidity, and presto, financial Armageddon barely averted. What lessons have we learned from that? What lessons has the government learned from that? The answer is no lesson. No lesson at all. A key part, this is from this piece written by Paul Sperry, a key part of President Obama's legacy will be the Fed's unprecedented collection of sensitive data on Americans by race. The government is prying into our most personal information at the most local levels, all for the purposes of racial and economic justice. And then he goes on. Such databases have never existed before. Obama is presiding over the largest consolidation of personal data in U.S. history. He is creating a diversity police state where government, race cops, and civil rights lawyers will micromanage demographic outcomes in virtually every aspect of society. The first black president, quite brilliantly, has built a quasi-reparations infrastructure perpetually fed by racial data that will outlast his administration. End quote. So they have all this data now. And wherever there is disparity, and understand, I told you that Supreme Court decision from just a few weeks ago, where they said that there can be disparate impact when it comes to housing, which means that there can be too many white people clustered together in one place for the government's liking, and they can try to change that. And they can change that now under law. They will change that. How much? What's enough? What's a fair balance? What's fair? They don't know. But they'll tell you when they decide. It won't be objective. There won't be an outward standard that they will use. They won't tell you what it is because that would involve numbers and that would involve quotas. And quotas, you recognize, feel a little too statist for public consumption when it comes to race issues. Because then all of a sudden, well, so does every community have to be 70% white, 30% other, which is more or less what the makeup of this country is right now? Is that what has to be the case? And what's a community? Where do you draw the boundary? Is it a county? Is it a state? Is it a city? Is it every village? Is it every neighborhood? And you think that's crazy, Buck. How could they even begin to make that part of their mandate? They have. They've done it. They're doing it right now. They are going to decide what a racially balanced community looks like. By the way, it does not stop there. As this article points out, they are creating a massive housing database by race, a massive mortgage database by race, credit, employment, school, all of it, racial data brought together so that the government can engage in a massive top-down micromanagement of every aspect of society based upon their notions of racial justice. That's it. And now it's a matter of law. The Supreme Court's already said it's true for housing. It's already true for employment, as we know. It's already true for many things. They're also going to look into school discipline. If you have disparities in school discipline, if you have more minorities disciplined by a school than non-minorities, they're going to say that's discriminatory. And you're going to say, well, isn't punching a teacher wrong? If more people from one background punch a teacher than people from another background, what do? We say that punching a teacher is okay? Take this process to its logical ends, and you will find out that, by the way, murder statutes have a disparate impact. Yeah, there are disparate impacts when it comes to murder, meaning that there are more murderers from some communities than others. Does that mean we change murder statutes? The government would say yes. Under the government's logic, murder statutes are unfair. Prohibitions against murder are racist, based upon their own usage of data and disparate impact theory. This is just the truth. They won't go there yet, but just give it some time. Give it some time. The Obama administration has set in motion a social and racial justice monster that will continue to invade every aspect of your life. And those of you listening to this who think, well, I'm not foolish enough to live in some coastal city or town, I'm not foolish enough to live in a blue progressive area, doesn't matter. The progressives are doing this at the federal level. This is top down. And they're going to use federal law and the massive federal bureaucracies to force you to bend the knee, to force your local city council, your town council, whatever it is, to change your schools, your housing, to change your local banks' attitudes towards who it gives a mortgage to. All of that now. The Obama administration has set it in motion, and it doesn't even matter who the next president is. Back in a minute.